When we think about the great age of exploration, names like Columbus or Magellan, they always pop into our heads, right? But what if I told you that nearly a century before them, a different power launched a fleet so massive it would have dwarfed anything Europe could put on the water for hundreds of years? Okay, let's dive into the incredible and kind of forgotten story of China's treasure fleet. 317. Just look at that number. That's how many ships were in just the first expedition. To give you some perspective, Columbus sailed with three. Three. This wasn't just an expedition, it was a floating city, a massive statement of power sailing across the Indian Ocean. Right? A fleet of that size, with that much ambition, it obviously requires an extraordinary leader. So who was the man trusted with this absolutely monumental task? And who was the powerful emperor that sent him? See, the story of these voyages, it really boils down to the story of two men. An ambitious emperor who really needed to prove himself, and the remarkable admiral he trusted to project his power across the entire known world. So, on one hand, you've got Emperor Yongle. Now, he seized the throne in a pretty bloody civil war, so he desperately needed to make his rule seem legit. And on the other, his chosen commander, the brilliant Admiral Zheng He. Their partnership, well, it would literally change the course of maritime history. And Zheng He's backstory it's just unbelievable. He wasn't born into nobility, no way. He was a boy from a Muslim family, captured in war, castrated, and then forced to serve the guy who would become emperor. But his sheer talent, his genius in military strategy and leadership, it allowed him to rise all the way to become the most powerful admiral on the planet. So why spend an absolute fortune on these giant fleets? Well, for Emperor Yongle, it was complicated. He needed foreign leaders to pay tribute to acknowledge him as the one true ruler. It was basically a massive public relations campaign to show the world the unbelievable might of Ming China. And some historians think he might have also been hunting for his nephew, the emperor he overthrew. Okay, so let's talk about the fleet itself, because this wasn't just about the number of ships. It was about the absolutely mind-blowing technology they carried. These vessels were, hands down, the most advanced of their time. Get this, the flagships were called baochuan, or treasure ships, and some historians estimate they were over 50 meters long. These were truly gigantic wooden vessels, like floating treasure chests designed to just awe and intimidate everyone they met. This quote from the famous traveler Ibn Battuta, who was describing similar Chinese ships a bit earlier, it gives us a real sense of what these were like. They weren't just ships, they were complex, multi-decked cities capable of carrying over 1,000 soldiers, diplomats, doctors, and merchants. The whole shebang. And this was the secret sauce. This is how they did it. They had technology that Europeans wouldn't even get close to for centuries. Watertight compartments, that meant a single leak wouldn't sink the whole ship. Advanced rudders gave them incredible control. This wasn't just exploration, it was a full-on display of technological supremacy. All right, so with this incredible fleet and a clear mission, Zheng He set sail. Over the course of nearly 3 decades, he would lead 7 epic voyages that just kept pushing the boundaries of the known world for China. I mean, just look at this map for a second. The scope is staggering. The voyages started in Southeast Asia, pushed all the way across the Indian Ocean to India and Sri Lanka, then reached the Persian Gulf in Arabia, and ultimately made it all the way to the coast of modern-day Kenya and Somalia in East Africa. And this timeline just shows you that steady, relentless push westward. For 28 years, these massive fleets were a regular presence across the entire Indian Ocean, connecting all these diverse cultures through trade and, well, a little bit of force. And look, these were not sightseeing trips, not even close. Zheng He was a diplomat, sure, but he was also the cop on the beat. He captured one of the region's most feared pirates, he acted as a mediator in local conflicts, and when a king in Sri Lanka got a little too hostile, he just abducted him and brought him back to China to, learn his lesson. So these voyages, they brought back incredible riches, knowledge, prestige, everything. But then, after nearly 30 years of unprecedented exploration, this golden era just came to a sudden, almost unbelievable stop. Some of the most amazing things they brought back were exotic animals that caused an absolute sensation back in China. This scroll here shows a giraffe being presented to the emperor. Can you just imagine the wonder, the shock of seeing this creature at the imperial court? But to them, this was way more than just a strange animal. The court scholars declared the giraffe to be a living Qilin, a mythical beast, kind of like a unicorn, whose appearance meant that a wise and just ruler was on the throne. For Emperor Yongle, this was the ultimate stamp of heavenly approval, the perfect justification for his rule and his incredibly expensive voyages. Shortly before he died on that final voyage, Zheng He himself had this inscribed on a stone tablet. I mean, his own words. They just perfectly captured the epic, almost poetic scale of his life's work, navigating these vast oceans and seeing waves like mountains rising to the sky. So why on earth did it all end? Well, there wasn't one single reason. It was more like a perfect storm of factors. The voyages were incredibly, ridiculously expensive. And after Emperor Yongle died, the new leaders felt that money was way better spent fighting the Mongols and rebuilding the Great Wall. Plus, the tribute they got back often wasn't as valuable as the silk and porcelain they were giving away. China just turned inward, and the era of the treasure fleet was over. And that brings us to our final huge, lingering question. Just try to picture a world where those Chinese treasure ships were still sailing the oceans when the first Portuguese caravels started creeping around Africa. What if Zheng He's massive fleet, not Columbus's 3 tiny ships, had been the one to connect the great continents? It's honestly one of history's most fascinating what-ifs.